The night had settled over the city, thick and heavy like an unspoken secret. I was on my way to the next job, clutching the worn leather bag that held all my tools of the trade, ledgers, contracts, and a sense of detachment. Working as a debt collector had taught me one thing: people's true faces showed when they were cornered. Tonight, though, it wasn't just overdue loans and unpaid promises I'd be collecting. No, tonight was different. The address scrawled on the crumpled piece of paper led me to a decrepit building at the edge of the city. The windows were darkened, save for one faint glow seeping through a second-story window. The structure loomed over me, its bricks cracked and crumbling, as if the building itself had secrets it didn't want to share. I checked the name again, Jonathan Wexler. My client insisted this man owed a debt, one that had to be retrieved tonight. Inside, the air was musty, tinged with something metallic. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, and for a moment, I felt as though something moved in the corner of my eye. When I turned, there was nothing but peeling wallpaper. A faint scratching noise drew my attention further down the corridor. It was subtle, almost like nails on wood, but enough to set my nerves on edge. The apartment door was ajar, the faint creak of its hinges breaking the suffocating silence. I knocked softly. "Mr. Wexler." "I'm here to discuss," my voice faltered as I stepped inside. The air grew colder, wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace. The smell hit me first, a pungent mix of decay and damp wood. It clung to my clothes and crawled into my nostrils. The apartment was sparsely furnished. A sagging couch sat in the middle of the room, and books were strewn about haphazardly. But what caught my attention was the object on the coffee table. A box. It was carved from dark wood, etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer when the light caught them. The sight of it made my skin crawl. As I stepped closer, the symbols seemed to shift, as though alive. My heart skipped a beat. "That's it," I muttered to myself. My client had been vague, but they were clear about one thing: retrieve the item and leave. No questions asked. As I approached, a low hum filled the room. I paused, straining to locate its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My fingers brushed the box, and a chill shot up my arm. The hum stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat. That's when I noticed it. Faint, almost imperceptible whispers. They weren't words, not exactly, but a cadence that teased the edges of comprehension. I spun around, but I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper now, almost alive. My breath quickened as I shoved the box into my bag and turned toward the door. And then I heard it. A laugh. Low, guttural, and impossibly close. "Mr. Wexler." My voice was barely a whisper. The laugh came again, this time from the hallway. Clutching the bag tightly, I stepped into the corridor. It was empty, but the air felt heavier, pressing against my chest. I started down the hall, the flickering lights casting erratic shadows. One of them moved, not in sync with me, but independently, darting just out of sight. The scratching sound from earlier returned, now louder, echoing down the hallway. By the time I reached the staircase, my hands were trembling. The old wood groaned under my weight as I descended. Halfway down, the whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were pleas, threats, and something else, a hollow, mournful wail that made my stomach twist. I broke into a run, the bag thumping against my side as I stumbled into the lobby. The front door was within reach when it slammed shut on its own. The force shook the walls, and a gust of icy wind swept through the room, extinguishing the single bulb that lit the space. I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "You took it." The voice was behind me now, deep and resonant. I spun around to face the speaker. A figure stood in the darkness, barely distinguishable from the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow that seemed to pierce through me. Its form wavered, like smoke struggling to maintain a shape. "You shouldn't have taken it," it continued, stepping closer. With each step, the air grew colder, freezing the breath in my lungs. I'm just doing my job," I stammered, clutching the bag as though it could protect me. "If this belongs to you, take it." The figure stopped, tilting its head as if amused. "It doesn't belong to anyone. Not anymore." Suddenly, the box inside my bag grew warm, almost burning. I yanked it out and dropped it to the floor. The symbols glowed a vivid red, and the humming returned, louder than before. The shadows around me began to shift, coalescing into forms that defied logic, twisting, writhing shapes that seemed to flicker between dimensions. One of them brushed past me, its touch icy and sharp. "You can't leave," the figure said, its voice echoing in my head. "Not with that." I backed away, heart pounding. My mind raced for an escape, but every door and window was sealed. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, narrowing the room with each passing second. The air became oppressive, filled with the scent of sulfur and decay. In a desperate act, I kicked the box across the floor. It slid to a stop near the figure, who crouched over it, long, claw-like fingers tracing the symbols. The shadows around us began to swirl, converging on the box. "It's awake now," it whispered, almost reverently. The light from the box grew brighter, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced across the walls. Before I could process the words, the box sprang open. A blinding light filled the room, accompanied by an otherworldly scream that reverberated through my very bones. The figure dissolved into the light, its form stretching and fracturing as it was pulled into the box. The shadows followed, sucked into the vortex like water down a drain. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The box lay silent and still, its symbols dim. The air was warm again, and the oppressive weight had lifted. I approached it cautiously, half expecting it to spring to life once more. But it didn't. With shaking hands, I grabbed the box and shoved it back into the bag. This time it felt lighter, as though whatever had been inside was truly gone. But the silence was unnerving, as though the building itself was holding its breath. The front door creaked open, revealing the quiet street beyond. I didn't question it. I ran, not stopping until I was back in my car. As I drove away, I glanced at the bag in the passenger seat. My client would get their item, but they'd also get a warning: some debts aren't worth collecting. Behind me, in the rearview mirror, the faint glow of yellow eyes watched me from the shadows of the apartment. The box might have been empty, but something had been left behind. Something that wasn't finished with me yet.